Rain poured down like 1,000 unspoken prayers that night. New York City streets were soaked in a cold, merciless darkness, where the glimmer of neon lights flickered like dying stars. Ambulance sirens wailed in the distance, but none of them were for her. Amelia Carter lay curled on the wet pavement outside the emergency entrance of St. Mary's Hospital, shivering and gasping for breath. Her chest rose and fell like a fragile flame struggling against a storm. She had begged. She had cried. She had pleaded. But no one had listened. Hours earlier, the hospital administrator had looked at her with nothing but polite cruelty, a sterile smile, paperwork in hand, as if her pain were just another line on a form. "I'm sorry, Miss Carter. Without insurance, there's nothing more we can do." The words had echoed like a death sentence in the sterile white hallway. She remembered clutching the hem of the doctor's coat, falling to her knees, begging them to not send her away. Her body was weak, the cancer had taken its toll. But their faces remained unmoved. They turned their backs and the doors closed behind her, leaving her outside like discarded trash. Now, under the bruised sky, Amelia coughed violently. A metallic taste filled her mouth, blood. Her thin hospital gown clung to her skin as the rainwater soaked through. Her dark brown hair stuck to her face in messy strands, her lips trembling with the chill. For the first time in her life, she felt truly invisible. People passed by with umbrellas, never looking down. A few glanced, but none stopped. In this city, broken souls lying on the street were nothing new. Amelia tilted her head back, eyes toward the night sky. The rain blurred everything, the streetlights, her memories, even her fear. "So this is it," she whispered hoarsely to no one. Her voice cracked as if it too was dying. "This is how I end." She had lost everything already, her parents, her job, her friends who disappeared the moment her illness became inconvenient. The world had turned its back on her, and she had no strength left to fight. Her vision dimmed around the edges, and the pounding of her heartbeat grew slower, softer. Then she heard it, a low growl of an engine cutting through the night like a predator's breath. Headlights swept across the wet street, and a sleek black car, the kind no ordinary man drove, came to a slow, deliberate stop near the hospital entrance. The door opened with a quiet click, and a tall figure emerged, dressed in a perfectly tailored black coat. His shoes didn't splash into puddles. He walked like the rain itself moved out of his way. Lorenzo. DeLuca. People in the underworld whispered his name like a prayer and a curse all at once. He was the kind of man who never needed to raise his voice to make a city tremble. Born into power, raised in blood, Lorenzo ruled New York's most feared mafia empire with a smile that could disarm and destroy. He wasn't supposed to be here tonight. But fate doesn't ask for permission. It simply writes its stories in the rain. His sharp gray eyes scanned the alley, falling on the fragile girl lying on the pavement. She was small, pale, drenched, and yet something about her made him stop. His men moved forward instinctively, two tall guards in black suits, but Lorenzo lifted his hand slightly. A simple gesture, and they froze. He took a slow step toward her. Amelia didn't notice him at first. She was drifting between pain and numbness, too weak to move. But she felt the shadow fall over her. Warmth, or maybe danger, loomed above her like a storm ready to strike. Her heart fluttered weakly. She forced her eyes open, just enough to see the blurred shape of a man standing before her, the glow of the streetlight framing his face like something not quite real. Who are you?" Her voice was barely a whisper. Lorenzo crouched down slowly, his coat brushing the wet ground, but his movements controlled, precise. He studied her face with an unreadable expression. Rain dripped from his dark hair onto his cheekbones, but his gaze never wavered. His voice, when he finally spoke, was low, steady, and terrifyingly calm. "No one dies in my city," he said, without my permission. Amelia blinked. She thought she was hallucinating. Who said something like that? She almost laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that came out as a cough. Go away, she rasped, her body trembling. Just let me disappear. But Lorenzo wasn't the kind of man people refused. He didn't ask for permission. He reached out, his leather-gloved hand sliding behind her back with practiced control, and lifted her into his arms as if she weighed nothing at all. Amelia gasped, but the sound died in her throat. His chest was warm against the freezing night. For a moment, she almost forgot she was dying. You'll disappear, he said quietly, his lips near her ear. When I say you will, not before. She tried to protest, but the darkness finally pulled her under. Lorenzo carried her toward the waiting car. His guards exchanged wary glances. They had seen him kill, torture, rule with iron precision. But this, they had never seen him save. Inside the car, the heater roared to life. Lorenzo sat with Amelia still in his arms as his men drove. Her head rested against his chest, her breath shallow. He stared down at her, not with softness, but with a strange, quiet calculation. He remembered that face, not perfectly, not clearly, but enough. Years ago, before the blood, before the crown of his empire, there had been a hospital, a man in a white coat, a woman with a kind smile, a little girl playing in a corridor. Her. He tightened his grip slightly, not in tenderness, but like a man holding onto a ghost he thought he'd buried long ago. Take her to the mansion, he ordered. His voice snapped through the silence like a whip. The mansion wasn't a house. It was a fortress wrapped in luxury. A grand estate on the outskirts of the city where the Mafia king lived surrounded by silence and control. Massive iron gates slid open as the black car rolled in. Inside, the air was warm, scented faintly of expensive whiskey and cedar wood. Lorenzo walked past his guards, past the grand staircase, and into a private room, simple but safe. His doctor was already there. Lorenzo's world didn't wait for instructions. Amelia was laid on a soft bed, her body shivering uncontrollably. The doctor moved quickly, setting up fluids, checking her vitals. She's critical, the doctor murmured. If we don't start immediate treatment, you'll start, Lorenzo interrupted coldly. Whatever it takes. The doctor hesitated. But she's not. Lorenzo's eyes snapped up, sharp as a blade. Do I look like I care? Silence. The doctor swallowed hard and began the treatment without another word. No one in this house argued with Lorenzo DeLuca. Got hours passed like slow-moving smoke. Rain tapped against the windows. Amelia drifted in and out of consciousness, unaware of where she was, unaware of the man who had pulled her from death. But in the dark corner of the room, Lorenzo sat in a leather chair, his elbows resting on his knees, watching her like a man watching a puzzle he didn't know how to solve. He didn't save people. That wasn't who he was. People feared him, obeyed him, hated him, but they didn't know him. He never gave anyone the chance, so why her? Lorenzo's mind was a map of violence and logic, not mercy. Yet something about this broken, shivering girl clawed at the edges of that carefully built wall. Boss, one of his men said softly from the doorway. Should we find out who she is? Lorenzo didn't look away from her. His voice was calm, lethal. I already know who she is. Morning crept slowly through the rain clouds. Amelia stirred for the first time. Her lashes fluttered, her breathing hitched. When she opened her eyes, it wasn't the hospital ceiling she saw. It was a gold chandelier. Her fingers brushed against silk sheets. Confusion slammed into her like a wave. She pushed herself up, weak and shaky, scanning the unfamiliar room. Marble floors, thick velvet curtains, no machines beeping. No nurses. Only the faint echo of silence and something far heavier in the air. And then she saw him. Lorenzo stood near the tall window. wearing a black shirt with the sleeves rolled to his forearms. He was built like someone who had never lost a fight. His presence filled the room like smoke, dangerous, consuming, inescapable. "Good," he said without turning fully. "You're awake." Amelia froze. Her throat went dry. Where am I?" "In a place where people don't die unless I allow it." His answer made no sense, but his voice carried weight, the kind that didn't invite questions. Amelia's heart hammered against her ribs. She pulled the blanket tighter around her. "Why am I here? Who are you?" He finally turned, stepping closer with the kind of calm only predators had. "I'm the man who decided you don't get to die yet." Her lips trembled. "I didn't ask you to save me." He leaned down, his face just inches from hers, and for a heartbeat, the world stilled. "I don't wait for permission." Outside the room, Lorenzo's right-hand man watched silently. "Boss," he whispered to another guard, "this girl, she's not just anyone, is she?" Lorenzo's cold voice drifted through the half-open door. "She doesn't know it yet, but she's already mine." Amelia didn't trust the silence. It wasn't the kind that soothed. It was the kind that waited, like a predator in the dark. The air inside the mansion felt heavy, too still, too careful. Outside the tall windows, the morning light bled slowly through the rain, casting a pale silver glow across marble floors and velvet curtains. This place wasn't meant for the weak. It was made to keep people in or keep the world out. She couldn't tell which. She had never seen a place like this up close. Crystal chandeliers glittered above her head. Expensive art hung on the walls, and everything smelled faintly of smoke, leather, and power. Yet beneath the luxury, there was something else. A presence. Something cold. The door creaked. 2 men entered, both in black suits, tall, broad-shouldered, and silent. Their faces were carved from stone, their movements precise. Amelia's hands gripped the blanket tighter instinctively. These weren't doctors or nurses. These were men who followed orders without asking questions. One of them spoke in a clipped tone. "Mr. DeLuca is waiting." Amelia swallowed. She didn't know who this Mr. DeLuca was, but she already hated the weight of his name. She pushed herself upright slowly. Her body was still weak, but she forced her trembling legs to touch the floor. "I can walk," she whispered. They didn't reply. They simply escorted her down a long, dimly lit hallway. Every step echoed like a drumbeat. At the end of the hall, a pair of large double doors stood slightly ajar. Behind them, voices, low, controlled, dangerous. Amelia paused just outside, pressing a hand against her chest. She didn't know why her heart was pounding so hard. She didn't want to meet this man. She didn't owe him anything. He had saved her life, yes. But no one did something like that for free. One guard pushed the door open. Inside was a study, but not the kind in movies. This one was layered with power. Floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with old books and files. A long desk of dark wood. And behind it, sitting like a king who didn't need a throne, was Lorenzo DeLuca. He was wearing a crisp black shirt again, sleeves rolled to his forearms, a silver watch glinting against his tanned skin. He wasn't reading. He wasn't typing. He was just sitting there, calm, controlled, like the entire world bent around him. His eyes lifted to her, sharp and deliberate. Amelia froze. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He just looked, and it felt like he could see everything inside her, every fear, every weakness, every secret she didn't even know she had. "Sit," he said. His voice was low, smooth as silk, but there was no warmth in it. It was an order, not a request. Amelia hesitated for half a second, then sat down across from him. Her fingers clenched nervously in her lap. Lorenzo leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the desk. "How do you feel?" She stared at him. "You kidnapped me." A faint ghost of a smirk crossed his lips. Not humor, just interest. I saved your life. You had no right to. Actually, he interrupted softly. I have every right. You were dying in my city. She flinched at the way he said my. Not the hospitals, not the government's, his. It wasn't arrogance. It was fact. Amelia forced herself to meet his gaze. Why? Why me? Lorenzo studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Because I don't like loose ends, he said finally. And because... His voice lowered, dangerous now. You're not just some dying girl. Her breath caught. What does that mean? Instead of answering, he stood up and walked around the desk. His presence filled the space like smoke. When he reached her side, he leaned down slightly, so close she could feel the warmth of his breath against her skin. You'll stay here, he said softly, deadly. Under my protection. My roof. My rules. She shook her head. No, I have a life. I can't just... You don't have a life, he said, cutting through her protest like a knife. You were left to die. Remember? The words stung like a slap. Her lips parted, but nothing came out. He wasn't wrong. No one had fought for her. No one had even looked at her. Only him. And she hated that truth more than she hated him. Lorenzo straightened, his voice cold again. You can walk out that door right now if you want. But the moment you do, they'll find you. They? She whispered. His smirk returned, sharper this time. The people who want what you don't even know you're carrying. She didn't understand what he meant, but she felt the threat. It crawled under her skin like a chill. She stood up abruptly. I'm not staying here. Lorenzo's eyes darkened, not with anger, but amusement. He took a slow step closer to her, closing the distance like a predator cornering prey. Then run, he said simply. But understand something, Karamia. Outside this house, no one will save you. No one. The way he said Karamia, my dear, didn't sound tender. It sounded like a claim. She took a shaky step back. I don't trust you. He tilted his head slightly. Good, smart girl. Trusting me would be your first mistake. That night, the storm outside returned. Thunder rolled through the mansion like distant gunfire. Amelia couldn't sleep. She lay in a strange, luxurious bed, staring at the ceiling. Everything inside this house felt like it had been built to keep. People like her out or trapped within. She thought about running, about sneaking through the halls, finding a way out. But every door she'd seen earlier had been guarded. Every hallway had cameras. And worse, she didn't even know where she was. Why was he keeping her here? Why her? Her thoughts were interrupted by a sound, soft footsteps outside her room. The door didn't open, but something about the way those steps paused told her someone was standing there, listening. She sat up slowly. The air shifted. A moment later, a deep voice, his voice, came through the door. Sleep, Lorenzo said quietly. You're safe here. Amelia's chest tightened. Safe. A word she hadn't believed in for a long time. She pressed her back against the headboard, whispering into the dark. Safe with the devil isn't really safe. Outside. Lorenzo walked away without a word. Days passed like a blur. Amelia slowly regained her strength. But the mansion's walls were beginning to feel like golden chains. Wherever she went, someone was watching. Guards at every door, cameras, locked gates. Lorenzo wasn't always around, but when he was, his presence filled the room like a storm cloud, and yet, something strange was happening. Every evening, at exactly the same time, Lorenzo would walk through the mansion, calm, controlled, and end up in the study. Sometimes with guests, sometimes alone. Amelia started noticing things, whispers, people arriving late at night, men in suits carrying briefcases, women with cold eyes. She realized quickly this wasn't a house. It was the headquarters. She overheard whispers in Italian, words she couldn't fully understand. But one word she kept hearing again and again: La Chiavi. The key dot, and they always glanced in her direction when they said it. One evening, Lorenzo entered the dining room where Amelia was sitting. His black suit was immaculate, his shirt collar slightly undone, revealing a sliver of tattooed skin at his throat. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, the silence between them as heavy as lead. "Why do your people keep looking at me like that?" she finally asked, her voice trembling slightly. He took a slow sip. "Because, Bella, they know something you don't." Her hands clenched in her lap. "What is that supposed to mean?" Lorenzo placed the glass down and walked toward her, each step deliberate. "You are not just some girl the world threw away. You're leverage." Her heartbeat kicked up. "Leverage for what?" "For a war," he said simply. Amelia's blood ran cold. Lorenzo leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "My enemies think you're the key to something they want. I don't know how yet, but I will." She took a step back. "And until then, what? You keep me here like a prisoner?" His hand shot out faster than she expected, grabbing her wrist. Not hard enough to hurt, but hard enough to remind her exactly who he was. "Not a prisoner," he said softly. "Protected. There's a difference." Her breath hitched. Their faces were inches apart now. She could feel the warmth of his breath, smell the faint scent of whiskey and danger on him. He wasn't gentle, but there was something unspoken in his eyes. "Something buried." Amelia whispered. "I don't want your protection." Lorenzo tilted his head, his grip still steady. "You don't have a choice." That night, when the house fell quiet again, Amelia crept toward the window. She needed air. She needed to remember what freedom felt like. But when she pulled the curtain aside, she saw the high gates, the guards with guns, and the endless forest beyond. She realized something horrifying. Even if she managed to escape, she had nowhere to go, and someone out there was already hunting her. Meanwhile, inside the study, Lorenzo sat alone in the dark, tapping his fingers on the desk. A single file lay open in front of him. A photograph, a man in a white coat, a girl in PIGTA. "I messed out, Amelia. You shouldn't have come back into my world, Piccola," he whispered. "But now that you have, no one touches you, ever." Outside the mansion walls, an unmarked black car stopped at the edge of the forest. A man with a scar across his face stepped out, lighting a cigarette. He looked toward the mansion through the trees. "She's alive," he muttered in Italian, flicking ash onto the wet ground. Then the game begins. The rain had stopped, but the sky still hung heavy with the weight of a storm that hadn't completely passed. A damp mist clung to the mansion grounds, crawling over the tall iron gates like a warning. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was the kind of quiet that came before something broke. Amelia had stopped counting the days since she woke up in Lorenzo De Luca's mansion. Each morning bled into the next. Each night carried the same haunting question: why her? She wasn't special. She wasn't powerful. She was just this sick, forgotten girl the world had abandoned. And yet, she could feel it. Every guard's watchful eye, every whisper behind closed doors, every silent step in the hallways. There was something about her they weren't telling. She wrapped her arms around herself as she stood on the balcony outside the guest room. The air was cold, and her breath came out in thin clouds. Somewhere deep in the estate, she heard the faint echo of gunfire, distant, muted, like it wasn't meant to be heard. She knew better than to ask. The door creaked softly behind her. "You shouldn't be out here." His voice, low, smooth, dangerous. She turned to see Lorenzo leaning against the doorframe. His shirt sleeves were rolled up again, exposing strong forearms marked faintly with scars and ink. He always looked composed, like the storm inside him never touched the surface. "I needed air," she said softly. Lorenzo stepped onto the balcony, the scent of his cologne mingling with the mist. Air can be dangerous here, Bella. She looked at him, exasperated. Why do you always talk like everything's a threat? Because everything is. His eyes were sharper than usual tonight, not cold, but alert, watchful. This house keeps people out, but it also keeps things in, things. She repeated slowly. He didn't answer. Instead, he reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face, almost absent-mindedly. The touch wasn't tender. It was possessive, like a man touching something that already belonged to him. She stepped back. Don't. For a fraction of a second, something flashed in his eyes. Not anger. Something darker. But he stepped away without a word, hands in his pockets. Later that night, Lorenzo called for her. Not requested. Called. 2 guards escorted Amelia through unfamiliar hallways until they reached a room she hadn't seen before, a long, low-lit chamber lined with shelves full of old files and metal cabinets. A heavy oak table sat in the center. On it, a few folders, a laptop, and a single photograph. Lorenzo was there, of course. So was another man, older, with gray hair and a scar on his jaw. His presence was quiet but dangerous, like a blade hidden under silk. Sit, Lorenzo said. She sat. Her heart was already beating too fast. Lorenzo opened one of the folders and pushed a photo toward her. It was faded, old. A man in a white coat, smiling. Next to him, a little girl with pigtails, maybe 7 years old. Her breath caught in her throat. That's. She whispered, your father, Lorenzo finished for her. His voice was calm, but his gaze was locked on her face, waiting for a reaction. Amelia's hand shook as she touched the edge of the photograph. Where did you get this? Lorenzo didn't answer directly. He leaned back slightly. Your father wasn't just a doctor, Amelia. He was my family's doctor. Her eyes snapped to his. What? He worked for us, Lorenzo said simply. Years ago. He saved lives and hid secrets. Secrets that people would kill for even now. She felt like the ground beneath her was cracking. You're lying. Lorenzo's second in command, the scarred man, spoke for the first time. You were a child. You wouldn't remember. But your father helped us during the Romano War. He had something very important. Something people are still looking for. Her heart pounded. What something? Lorenzo's gaze hardened. Information, documents, codes, money, names, the kind of things that decide who lives and who dies in my world. She shook her head. No, my father was a good man. A small, humorless smile curved Lorenzo's mouth. Good men die early in my world, Bella. He was good. That's why he died. Amelia stumbled to her feet. Stop. Lorenzo rose too, calm but imposing. I'm not the one you need to hate for this. I'm the only reason you're still breathing. Why didn't you tell me earlier? She demanded, because I didn't trust you. His honesty hit like a slap. I still don't, but my enemies, they trust their greed. And right now they're moving. She stared at him, her pulse thundering in her ears. What do they want? They want what your father hid, Lorenzo said, stepping closer. And they think you have it. Outside the mansion, engines roared softly in the dark. A convoy of black SUVs crawled up the narrow road like wolves closing in on prey. Men with cold eyes and heavier guns stepped out silently. They weren't knocking Dot inside. Lorenzo's phone buzzed. One glance, and his jaw tightened. They're here, he muttered. Who's here? Amelia asked, but he was already moving. The men in the room sprang into action like trained soldiers. Orders in Italian flew through the air. Guns appeared in hands like extensions of their bodies. Lorenzo grabbed her wrist and pulled her behind him. Stay close to me. What's happening? She whispered, panicked. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The distant crack of gunfire was enough. The mansion's security lights flared to life, flooding the grounds in harsh white. Guards took positions. Lorenzo walked through the chaos like he'd done it 1,000 times, calm, precise, terrifying. Amelia clung to the back of his jacket, heart hammering. Her mind screamed at her to run, to hide. But her feet wouldn't move without him dot at the entrance hall. The first explosion hit. The glass at the top of the door shattered as bullets ricocheted through the room. Amelia screamed and ducked behind a pillar. Lorenzo didn't flinch. He raised his gun with elegant ease, aimed and fired. One shot. A man outside dropped. His guards moved in a coordinated storm, firing, shouting, taking cover. Amelia had never seen anything like it. Real violence wasn't like in movies. It was fast, loud, merciless. Lorenzo knelt beside her, reloading smoothly. "Look at me." She looked up, shaking. "Do not run," he said sharply. "Do not scream. You stay with me or they'll take you." "Who are they?" She whispered. "People who think they own what's mine," he growled. His hand brushed her cheek for a split second, not gently, but like he was marking her as untouchable. Then he turned, firing again. The shooting lasted minutes, but it felt like hours. Eventually, the intruders retreated, dragging their wounded with them. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance, but none would come close. No one interfered with Lorenzo de Luca's wars. The mansion smelled of smoke and gunpowder. Glass crunched under boots. Amelia sat on the floor, trembling. Her world, the tiny, fragile, ordinary world she clung to, was gone. This was something else. Something she couldn't run from. Lorenzo crouched in front of her, holstering his gun. His black shirt was splattered with blood, not his. His breathing was steady, like this was nothing new. "You saw what this is now," he said softly. "There's no going back," she whispered. "Why me?" His hand brushed the side of her neck, his thumb just under her jaw. "It was too intimate, too dangerous. Because your father gave the key to the wrong people. And now, you're the last piece of his secret." That night, Amelia couldn't sleep. The images wouldn't leave her, the gunfire, the shouting, the way Lorenzo moved like a king defending his throne. She wanted to hate him. She wanted to fear him, but she also couldn't stop remembering the way he stood in front of her. Like he'd burn the world before letting anyone touch her. She crept toward the window again, but this time there was no mist. Only darkness. A single black car parked far beyond the gates. Someone was still watching. A quiet knock came at her door. Lorenzo entered without asking permission. He leaned against the wall, his shirt half unbuttoned, streaks of dried blood on his sleeves. His eyes found hers instantly. "They won't stop," he said simply. "Then why not let me go?" She snapped. "Why keep me here if I'm just a target?" "Because," he said, stepping closer, "I don't protect people. I protect what's mine." She stiffened as his fingers tilted her chin upward, forcing her to meet his eyes. There was no kindness there. Just fire, possession, a promise of violence for anyone who dared to touch her. "You're not mine," she whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. He smirked faintly. "Not yet." Somewhere deep in the house, hidden behind layers of concrete and steel, Lorenzo opened a safe after she fell asleep. Inside, files, cash, old photographs, and a small black box with a serial code. He turned it in his hand like a man holding a loaded gun. "She doesn't know," the scarred man said behind him. "She doesn't need to," Lorenzo replied quietly. "Not yet. And when she finds out?" Lorenzo's jaw clenched. His gray eyes darkened. "Then she'll understand why I can't let her go." The night carried a different kind of silence now. Not the stillness of safety, but the breathless pause before a storm tears everything apart. The mansion was wrapped in the illusion of calm, but Amelia could feel it in her bones. Something was wrong. It had been wrong since the attack. Lorenzo's men moved like shadows through the hallways. Sharper, quieter, watching everything. They no longer looked like guards. They looked like soldiers preparing for war, and Lorenzo, he was changing too. The mask of calm control he wore so easily had begun to crack, not in front of everyone, but when he thought she wasn't looking. She'd catch him standing alone near the windows, a cigarette burning down between his fingers, his jaw clenched tight as if he were silently trying to hold the world together with his teeth. She didn't know why it bothered her. She shouldn't care. This wasn't her world. She wasn't supposed to be here. But something about seeing the devil crack felt terrifying. Because if he fell, what would happen to her? That evening, Lorenzo summoned her to his study. The heavy door swung open, and she stepped inside cautiously. He was there, standing in front of a massive map spread across the table. Red lines, black markers, names scribbled in Italian. Plans of war. He didn't look at her at first. His hands were pressed against the table, head slightly bowed, shoulders tight with tension. "What's happening?" she asked quietly. Lorenzo finally looked up. His gray eyes burned with a kind of cold fire that made her take an involuntary step back. "They're gathering," he said simply. "The Moretti Syndicate, Romano's dogs. Even some of my own men have started moving in ways I don't like." She frowned. "Your own men?" He gave a dark little laugh. "Loyalty is a currency in my world, Bella. It's expensive. And sometimes people decide to sell." She stepped closer, ignoring the way her pulse kicked up. "Why are they after me? What do I have that's worth all of this?" Lorenzo's jaw tightened. "Something your father hid. Something I've been protecting for years. You keep saying that, but never tell me what it is." His eyes locked on hers. "Because the less you know, the longer you live." That answer burned. She crossed her arms. "That's not protection. That's a cage." He moved closer, too close. "It's survival." She wanted to argue. She wanted to scream. But the weight of his voice crushed the words in her throat. Later that night, Lorenzo held a meeting with his most trusted men. Amelia didn't belong there, but she passed by the hall just as the door was cracked open slightly. Voices spilled out, low and furious. "We can't hold this ground forever." "Lorenzo," one man said. Lorenzo's reply was calm, too calm. "We're not holding. We're hunting." Another voice, familiar, Marco, Lorenzo's right hand. The man with the scar. The one who had always been near him. "We should give them the girl." Amelia froze. Lorenzo's voice turned to ice. "Say that again." "She's the reason they're coming after us. If we hand her over, the war ends before it starts." For a heartbeat, the room fell silent. Lorenzo's reply came out quiet, but it carried the weight of a gun pressed to a temple. "If you ever suggest that again, Marco, I'll put a bullet between your eyes myself." Amelia's breath caught. She pressed her back against the wall, shaking. He had defended her, but the fact that someone so close to him had even said it made her stomach twist. She backed away quietly, heart pounding. A few hours later, the betrayal came. Amelia woke to the sound of muffled shouting, doors slamming, boots pounding on marble floors. She sat up, her heart racing, when the door to her room burst open. Marco stood there, gun in hand. "Marco?" She whispered. "Don't make a sound," he hissed. She shook her head, stumbling back. "Where's Lorenzo?" "Busy," Marco said with a cruel smile. "Exactly how I need him to be." Before she could scream, his hand clamped over her mouth. He dragged her through the back corridors, the ones she'd never been allowed to see. The guards didn't stop him. Why would they? He was Lorenzo's right hand. No one questioned him. They exited through a hidden door into the cold night. A van waited. Men in masks stood outside. The sound of the forest was thick and heavy. Amelia kicked and fought, but Marco slammed her against the van, his voice low and venomous. You think he can protect you forever? He's already lost everything once. This time, it's his empire. Inside the mansion, Lorenzo was in the war room when the alarm finally sounded. Boss. One of his men shouted, "She's gone." Lorenzo's head snapped up like a predator, catching scent of blood. What did you just say? Amelia. She's been taken. Marco's team was the last, but Lorenzo was already moving. The calm mask shattered. The storm he had been holding back broke free. In the van, Amelia's wrists were bound. The masked men didn't speak. Marco sat in the front seat, speaking into a burner phone. She's with us, he muttered. Yes, I know what she's worth. You want her, you deal with me now, not Lorenzo. Her stomach dropped. He wasn't betraying Lorenzo for ideology. He was doing it for power, but they didn't get far, because Lorenzo DeLuca wasn't a man who waited. He hunted. The van screeched as gunfire exploded around them. Tires blew out. Amelia screamed as the vehicle spun out of control, crashing into the side of the forest road. Before she could blink, black SUVs surrounded them like wolves. Lorenzo stepped out of the first one, gun in hand, his eyes glowing with fury under the headlights. His men flanked him, silent, lethal. Marco stumbled out of the van, blood dripping from his forehead, gun raised. Lorenzo, he spat. This is bigger than you. We could have ended this war. Lorenzo didn't let him finish. A single shot, clean, right between the eyes. Marco collapsed before the echo faded. Lorenzo didn't blink. He rushed to the back of the van, ripping the door open. Amelia was inside, trembling, rope digging into her wrists. She looked up at him, not as her savior, but as the devil drenched in blood. You came, she whispered hoarsely, his jaw clenched. Of course I did. He reached in, cut the ropes with a knife, and pulled her into his arms. Her heartbeat pounded against his chest. He smelled of gunpowder and rain. You killed him, she said, her voice shaking. His answer was soft but lethal. I told him what would happen if he touched what's mine. She wanted to hate that word, mine, but in that moment, buried against the warmth of his chest as the world burned around them, that didn't sound like a threat. It sounded like a vow back at the mansion. Lorenzo's men worked like a machine, locking down gates, securing perimeters, moving guns and files. A war wasn't coming. It had already begun. Lorenzo paced the study, hands clenched, blood still on his shirt. Amelia sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, still shaking. Why? She whispered finally. Why go this far for me? He turned slowly. The look in his eyes wasn't gentle. It wasn't romantic. It was raw, dangerous, true, because you're the only thing they can use against me, he said. And I don't lose what's mine. She swallowed hard. I'm not a thing, Lorenzo. His smirk was faint. No, you're the key. Later that night, when she was alone in her room, she replayed everything in her head. Marco's betrayal. The van, Lorenzo's gun pressed against betrayal itself. She should have been terrified. She should have hated him, but she also remembered the way he said, mine. Not like a man claiming a trophy. Like a man swearing a blood oath, and for the first time, she wasn't sure which was more dangerous, the people hunting her, or the man who had vowed to protect her in his private office. Lorenzo stared at Marco's blood drying on his hands. His most trusted man had turned on him, and that meant only one thing. The war was no longer a threat, it was here. Burn everything they own, he ordered coldly. We end this before they touch her again. The sky over the city was black as ash, the moon hidden behind storm clouds, like even it didn't dare to witness what was coming. The Moretti Syndicate had drawn first blood, but Lorenzo DeLuca was not a man who waited for his enemies to strike twice. The war had begun the moment. Marco's body hit the ground. Amelia watched from the balcony as convoys of black SUVs rolled out of the mansion gates. The rain fell in soft sheets, cold against the warm night. Down below, armed men moved like a silent army, Lorenzo's army. She should have felt safe. Instead, it felt like she was standing at the edge of a cliff. One wrong step and everything would burn. Inside the house, Lorenzo stood in front of the grand map spread across his war table. Red lines cut through streets and warehouses like veins. Every piece on that board was a life, every move a death. His men waited for orders, but he was silent. His jaw was tight, his knuckles white against the edge of the table. "Boss," one of his lieutenants said, "they've taken the docks." Moretti's men are gathering near Pier 12. Lorenzo's voice was calm, the kind of calm that only came from someone who had already decided to kill. "Then we take it back." Another man stepped forward. "They have heavy numbers. It's suicide to walk in without leverage." Lorenzo's eyes lifted slowly. "I don't walk in," he said. "I own it." Amelia entered the study quietly, barefoot on the cold marble floor. She had stopped caring about the mansion's strict rules days ago. Everyone was already at war. Lorenzo looked up the moment she stepped in. Even now, covered in black tactical gear, gun strapped to his side and a storm in his eyes. He still watched her like she was the only thing in the room that mattered. "You're not going out there," she said softly. But her voice trembled with the weight of what she already knew. His gaze didn't soften. "This war was coming long before you got here. Then why risk your life now?" She whispered, "You've killed, you've ruled, you've survived every storm. Why this one?" He walked toward her slowly. Each step carried years of violence, command, and something new, something heavier. Because they touched something that's mine. She hated that word, mine. It made her want to scream and cry and collapse all at once. But the way he said it, low, dangerous, final, it wasn't just possession. It was a vow carved into bone. She swallowed hard. "What if you don't come back?" He leaned down until his breath brushed against her skin. "Then I expect you to burn the world in my name." Her heart stuttered. He straightened before she could answer, grabbed his gun, and walked toward the door like a storm dressed in black. The docks were a graveyard of shadows and metal. Rain splashed against the cracked pavement. The Moretti men had taken their positions, dozens of them. And at the center of it all, waiting like a king on a rusted throne, was Vincenzo Moretti himself. "Lorenzo," Vincenzo called out, spreading his arms. "The devil himself comes down from his palace." How touching. Lorenzo stepped forward through the rain. His men fanned out behind him like a dark tide. His expression didn't change, but the air thickened, coiled, dangerous. "You came to my city," Lorenzo said quietly. "You took my men. You touched what's mine. Now you pay." Vincenzo laughed, sharp and cruel. "That girl isn't yours, DeLuca. She's the key. The thing your father's war left unfinished. Hand her over, and maybe I let you walk away alive." Lorenzo tilted his head slightly, rain dripping from his hair. "You made 3 mistakes tonight. First, you came into my territory. Second, you threatened me. And third," his voice lowered to a growl, "you thought she was a key. She's not a key. She's my war." And then all hell broke loose. Gunfire cracked through the night like thunder. Bullets ripped through air, sparks flying off shipping containers. Men shouted in Italian and English, their voices drowned by the storm. Lorenzo moved through it like a demon set free, cold, precise, merciless. Every shot he fired was final. No hesitation, Vincenzo's men started to fall one after another. But Moretti was smart. He'd planned this. Backup trucks roared in from the east, floodlights cutting through the night. For a moment, the DeLuca men were outnumbered, but Lorenzo had been waiting for that. Light them up, he said into the cum-dot snipers hidden on the rooftops fired simultaneously. Flames burst from the gas tanks near the dock. 2 Moretti trucks exploded, lighting up the harbor like the gates of hell. Men screamed, shadows turned to fire, and Lorenzo kept walking through it. Back at the mansion, Amelia paced her room like a trapped animal. Every thunderclap made her flinch. Her father's secrets, this war, Lorenzo's world, she was caught in all of it now. And no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't imagine a world where she just walked away. She rushed to the study. One of Lorenzo's men was there, monitoring the docks on multiple screens. The live feed showed fire and gunfire painting the harbor in red. Where is he? She demanded. The man didn't answer, didn't need to. Lorenzo was in the center of the chaos, moving like death itself. A tear slipped down her cheek before she realized it. At the docks, the battle reached its peak. Vincenzo finally stepped down from his perch, gun in hand. He and Lorenzo circled each other in the rain. The war between them older than Amelia. Older than this night. You should have stayed the king in your little palace. Vincenzo spat. Lorenzo's smirk was cold as ice. And you should have never touched what's mine. Vincenzo fired. The bullet grazed Lorenzo's arm, ripping through black fabric and skin. Lorenzo didn't flinch. He fired back, cleaner, faster. Vincenzo stumbled, clutching his side, blood blooming through his white shirt. Lorenzo walked up to him, gun steady. Vincenzo laughed weakly. All this, for a girl? Lorenzo leaned down close. Not a girl. My reckoning? The final shot echoed like thunder. Vincenzo collapsed into the mud, eyes glassy, the storm swallowing him whole. Hours later, the rain finally stopped. Smoke curled from the burning docks. The Moretti Empire had fallen. Lorenzo returned to the mansion covered in blood and rainwater. His shirt clung to his chest, torn at the shoulder. His men followed silently, knowing better than to speak. Amelia ran down the stairs before anyone could stop her. She froze when she saw him. There was blood on his hands, a wound on his arm, but his eyes were still steady. Still burning. You're hurt, she whispered. He gave a dark, tired laugh. Nothing I can't handle. You could have died. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the storm still clinging to him. I told you, Karamia. If I die, I take the world with me. Her breath shook. She hated that his words sounded more like a promise than a threat. Why? She asked again, softer this time. Why go this far for me? His hand came up slowly, cupping her jaw. For the first time, it wasn't a possessive touch. It was something raw, fragile, human, because they took everything from me once, and now I finally have something they can't touch. You don't own me, she whispered, though her heart wasn't steady anymore. He smirked faintly, leaning closer, his forehead brushing hers. No, amor mio. You own me. The next morning, the world was quieter. The war wasn't over, not really. In this world, it never ended. But the Moretti name was gone, burned into ash. Amelia stood at the edge of the balcony, looking out at the misty city. It didn't feel like a cage anymore. Not exactly. More like a choice she wasn't ready to make. Lorenzo joined her silently. No guards. No guns. Just the man behind the empire. You still have a choice, he said softly. Walk away. Or stay and learn what it means to rule hell. She turned to him, searching his eyes. She expected to find the monster everyone spoke of, but there was something else there too, something broken, something hers. She whispered, hell doesn't scare me anymore. Lorenzo smiled, the kind of smile only the devil could wear. Good. Amelia's story had begun the night the world left her to die. But it was in the devil's arms that she truly learned how to live, and Lorenzo De Luca. had finally found the one thing he couldn't control and didn't want to. End of chapter 5, The Devil's Heart, asterisk.